Thank you so much, Nidhi, Sandhya. If everyone else could also write your name in the chat box, it would really help. Thank you, Jyoti, Sarah. Hi, Pranali. Hi, I'm Shri John. I think we'll wait for a minute before we started. We have about 42 participants so far, and we are looking forward for a few more to join in. Uh, there are a few participants who were there last time, I can see, and a few new people. Welcome, Diti, Simran, Gitanjali. Thank you for joining. Thanks, Vikram. Thank you, Somia, Arun, and I think maybe we can start now since it's already 4 minutes. It's really lovely to see all of you who have joined in on time. Thank you so much. Um, just close this. So once again, a warm welcome to each and every one of you for the 10th Backbencher event today hosted by Adyan Foundation. And we have these sessions for about 3-4 times in the year. We will be sharing the invites every time whenever we have this session, and we would like to see each and every one of you being part of the sessions in the coming months. So please stay tuned. And for those who have joined in for the first time and wondering what is this backbenchers, why are we calling it backbenchers? So we call these sessions backbenchers because we often see in our classroom the children who sit behind on the last benches are, considered to be the mischievous one, but yet often they are the ones who are very much involved in the topic. They have interesting perspective. They are unstoppable with questions. They are very critical thinkers, also have innovative ideas, and they fearlessly express themselves. So, not to say that the others in the classroom don't have these qualities, but we do use this to emphasize the essence of the sessions that we have in our Backbenchers event. So Backbenchers event is an informal space where we explore topics related to policy, governance, education, and development. And these sessions are inspired by the insightful thinkers often found at the back of the classroom, those who are unafraid to ask the tough questions. So welcome to each and every one of you for today's Backbencher session. I'll be your moderator, and my name is Steffi. I work with Adyan Foundation, and I have many colleagues from Adyan Foundation who have joined me over here today. As you can see in the chat box, thanks to everyone who have joined in from Adyan. And we have Nishta, Divya, Aniket over here who will be helping us, supporting us with technical problems. So if you all have any technical issues, please do share it with us. Before we start, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. Nishta, could you please share the slide? Yes, it would be really nice if we could keep the mic on mute when someone else is speaking. And also it will be nice to see many faces. If you all can keep your videos on, that would be nice. And I can see already so many faces. That's really nice. Also, please do add your name and your organization's name in the chat box if you have not already done it. And if you have any question, during the session, please do put it all in the chat. We will take it up during the Q&A session. And also, if please related to the today's topic, because we have a very short time. We're just going to be wrapping up in an hour. So, and yes. Yeah, now it's the time to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Poonam Batra. Welcome, ma'am. A very good evening. Thank you for being here. And before I hand over the session to ma'am, I would like to share a little bit about her incredible journey through her career so far. For ma'am, it started uh, when, as a young developing clinical psychologist during her master's program, she volunteered at the Sanjeevani Society for Mental Health, and she was working there with individuals with crisis. Later, she taught at Jesus and Mary College, where she found herself informally counseling students who sought her help informally, often catching her on the staircase because there was no formal space at that point in time. And that's where Poonam ma'am realized the importance, and she kind of created a counseling center. And then from there, she understood that, from working with the adults, she kind of had this realization that instead of waiting to address these problems once they escalate, why not intervene earlier? And that's when the education came in, and driven by this idea, ma'am immersed herself in schools like Mirambika in Delhi and also in state schools in Madhya Pradesh through Eklavya. She worked with children from both the backgrounds, like different backgrounds, those who were privileged, those who also came from the disadvantaged backgrounds. And all of these experiences helped her and opened the eyes to the broader socio-political forces that shape the education, fueling her belief that meaningful change requires addressing individuals within the community. And this conviction led her to shift her focus entirely to the education, becoming a catalyst for change within the schools and the systems. So her transformative work culminated in the creation of the Bachelor's of Elementary Education, which we now know the BLEd program at the University of Delhi. It's a groundbreaking initiative rooted in the core principle, that is to improve education. We must start by listening to and being engaged with the teachers. So today, Dr. Batra will take us through her reflections on the importance of listening to teachers, critiquing policies and propositions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Poonam Batra. Ma'am, please share. The space is
Okay,
yours.
thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'll share my screen so that we can also sort of focus our attention on to some of the points that I have tried to put together, or I would say thoughts over a long journey in education that I've had after teaching pure psychology, as Steffi just mentioned. So for me, I think the more important thing is to begin with a more recent sort of change that has been enveloping the Indian education system and also society in a sense, and which is the change that was brought about as a result of reforms that coincided with the whole idea of economic liberalization and its ideology. And this led to systemic changes in both the policy and the practice of school education and teacher education. So quickly, there are 4 points I would like to flag here about state policy. One, of course, is the lack of state investment and professional support to teachers. We've had a very poor record there, and some details will emerge as I speak on. The neglect of developing institutional capacity to deal with teacher shortage. So, for example, when India did finally, after a long, long wait, was able to make right to education a fundamental right, we were very poorly equipped in terms of the number of teachers that the right to education would demand, because then children are going to come into schools. And as a result of which several compromises were made, starting, of course, much earlier with the DPP program. That was a loan that we took from the World Bank, early 1990s, and a whole sort of recruitment of so-called para teachers, which only India can boast of around the globe. We don't call them para teachers anymore. We call them contractual teachers. But this is how the system got inundated, and we still haven't been able to fulfill that shortage of teachers in the system. Delhi alone, which is the capital of the country, has about 35% contractual teachers in its schools. And the third important thing was making way for private players of different hues that took over the education system. And I know there are many of us sitting here who work within that private space in education. And it's not that I am deriding the idea of the private coming into education, but I would like to flag the importance of the public education system and how we cannot sort of let that space languish, like we have tried to as a result of poor policy and the bulk hiring of para teachers, which I've already mentioned. Within curriculum and pedagogy, the kind of systemic changes that came about, and I call them systemic because they have stayed, you know. And let's say the first thing is how curriculum itself got to be redefined as learning outcomes. And I call them disconnected set of learning outcomes, because we'll see how we've been sort of sidelining the importance of education process. And we've reduced teaching, therefore, to lower order cognitive skills and thinking, because teachers are being literally told how to dot the I and how to cross the T. And therefore, teachers are being made into very mechanized workers who would just have to follow certain ways of looking at things and, you know, conducting them, executing them. So they don't need to engage with more epistemological questions. And I think one of the other results of this reform has been to actually put all the onus of learning on the child. I mean, if we recall, those of us who must have definitely read literature, even if we were not involved ourselves, but during the DPEP program, one of the policy problems, of course, was that we reduced the constitutional commitment from elementary education, which was literally from birth to 14 years. And in the RTE, it is from 6 to 14. So we knocked off the pre-primary. But the DPEP program that came much before the RTE actually knocked off even the upper primary. So they focused only on 6 to 8, that is the primary years of schooling. That's why it was called the primary education program. But from that time onwards, the focus was either the teacher who became the object of reform rather than the system, and the child, and we started looking for what were called hard spots. You know, what are these hard spots? Let's find out where children fail and why they fail. And everything was sort of focused on, and that gradually led to putting the onus of learning on the child. And of course, it also led in a big way, divesting teachers of any agency, and the positioning of quality as just learning outcomes, or rather as an issue of management rather than educational process, is what has also distanced the idea of education aims, its practice, from the aims of social justice. Because I firmly believe that the Constitution of India actually looks at education as an important via media to be able to maintain a semblance of egalitarianism in society, democracy, fraternity. So we have sort of left that path when we have taken these reforms into center stage. And I have put the inclusion of learning outcomes in the RTE in a colored lettering, because this came post JVC, which is the Justice Verma Commission, and I will talk about it. But this has sort of furthered those kind of changes which have happened in education. And the Supreme Court intervened, that is through the Justice Verma Commission that was constituted by the Supreme Court, and it was a high-powered commission. The commission was on teachers and teacher education. And I was a member of that commission, so I have the full inside account of it, and I will briefly flag some important ideas. Now, this intervention actually happened when the Maharashtra government had filed a petition in the Supreme Court against the NCTE, which is the National Council for Teacher Education, a statutory body that is supposed to regulate teachers, teacher training, teacher education. We prefer to call it teacher education rather than training because it's a much wider concept. And their petition was that the NCT has given recognition to 291 private institutes, and we don't need them because we have surplus of teachers. And this was in 2010 or 11. But finally, in 2011, in response to this petition, the Supreme Court and the government of India actually pleaded with the Supreme Court and said, let's have a commission that will look at the entire teacher education sector and the whole issue of teachers in the context of RTE, because by that time, RTE was struggling to come into place as a result of demands for teachers, for more school space, and so on. The Justice Verma Commission, of course, made far-reaching recommendations, something like 30 recommendations, and one other very major recommendation of developing a task force that will actually look at the functionings of NCT and the act of NCT, because NCT is by an act of parliament, and to bring about radical transformations in the functioning of the organization. I don't have any bones about saying that NCT is still a Babu organization with 2.5 people, as I call it, because they're basically a chairperson and a vice chair who's probably never there because the seat never gets filled, and there are some undersecretaries and so on. So there is no academic capacity. And the NCT relied on academic institutions to make those visits to proposed teacher education institutes and so on. But there was rampant corruption that had crept into the whole system, including the 4 regional centers across the country. And I must also share with you that around 2006-07, there was a proposal of the government of India to actually repeal the NCT Act. So this is much before Justice Verma Commission. Not that I personally believe that we shouldn't be repealing acts just because they don't work. I think we have to make them work. So the idea is that you improve, because we do need regulation of the teacher education sector. Anyway, that's a long story, and then we come to the Justice Verma. Now, despite the intervention by the apex court, the institutionalized nexus between an entrenched teacher education system and a compromised state system shapes the education policy of teachers and teacher education. And that is a bit disturbing. Now, in what sense is NEP 2020 at odds with the JVC recommendations? Firstly, I must say that when the report of JVC came in 2012, it was accepted in toto by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court appointed an implementation committee to actually make sure what is the roadmap to be able to implement each of the 30 recommendations. There was a task force to look at NCT and its act under the Secretary School Education at that time, Anshu Vesh. All these reports, plus the 5 subcommittee reports that came out of the 30 recommendations, were roadmaps, literally laying out concretely what needs to be done to improve the sector, get it out of the rent-seeking corruption, and bring quality teachers' education and quality teachers to actually take on the challenge of RTE. Unfortunately, all this happened by 2014. So the only recommendation that could happen before the new government took over was to change the colonial model of 1-year B.Ed to a 2-year B.Ed. And even the M.Ed became a 2-year M.Ed. And this started happening from 2015. So the new norms came in October 2014, when the new government had already taken over in the summer. After which we never heard of the JMC, and it's been buried somewhere. But the most important things we need to know is that the NEP, and I'm quoting here from page 10 and 11, it talks of facilitating multiple pathways to learning, which means not just through the formal system. It talks of allowing alternative modes of education, and it talks of making the requirements for schools less restrictive given the RTE norms. So in a sense, I would say, if you look at the 66-page document of NEP 2020, you will find only 2 places where RTE mentioned, and it's literally mentioned as a historical artifact that it happened. It gave us, impetus for universalization and full stop. And in that sense, RTE with the 3 recommendations that came in prior to this government, 2 recommendations came prior. One is the no detention policy doing away with. The second was the extension for the teachers developing their professional qualification, those who were untrained. And the third came with this government with the Niti Aayog recommendation to include learning outcomes into the RT, which means Niti Aayog actually says in its document that it should be right to learning and not right to education. So those of us who are here and we know enough about education to understand that learning is obviously a very small component of education, and specifically if you restrict it to learning outcomes. And that is where we are. In doing this, of course, NEP reflects, I call it a new alliance between 3 interests. The first is the neoliberal narrative that, of course, started early 1990s, but it seeks to replace education for citizenship to education for only skill development and employability. And I'm not saying it should be this or that. It has to be both. The second is a behavioristic outcome-based model of education, which is driven by an international policy discourse. And we have a huge policy advocacy beginning with James Tooley in the 1990s to actually start low-fee paying budget schools, and we'll talk more about that. The third is the moral ideals of cultural nationalism and its entrenchment as the driver of curriculum and pedagogy design. So, the periodic tables are out, evolution is out, the medieval period, the Mughals are out. So it's a clearly an ideological project that's happening. And together, these forces are likely to accelerate the perpetuation of inequity because this is happening through an institutionalized mechanism that the policy has set. It talks of SEDGs, the socioeconomically deprived groups, and almost everybody is in that basket, except you and me. We would be about 18 to 20%, and everybody else is in that basket, the migrants, the girls, the SC, the ST, the OBC, the language minorities, everyone. And they propose clearly in the NEP that there will be a separate system. They're calling it special education zones. They're calling different kinds of teacher training programs for them from within the community, and a host of other things which are problematic. The JVC recommendations, as I said, as it came from the implementation committee, and then the government changed and we had to stop because I was also part of this committee and we just became redundant. This first thing they suggest is that we need to develop institutional capacity. And here I must recall and remind ourselves that Madhya Pradesh was the first state that did away with the teacher cadre. And this is 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago. when they said we don't need teachers. So everybody was contractual, and it started with what was called the Education Guarantee Scheme, which is really the EGS, One Teacher Schools, which Amita Sharma, a very well regarded bureaucrat, started. She even got an award for it. And now all those schools are merged and they're no longer called One Teacher Schools, but they are still One Teacher Schools. And there are no teachers who are permanent in Madhya Pradesh. Bihar sort of followed. It recruited 2.5 teachers on contract some time ago. But this kind of a recommendation that we need to develop in each state, institutional capacity to prepare teachers with the help of universities, was not paid any heed to. And the second most important thing was to arrest the proliferation of commercial private substandard. At the time of JVC, 95% of teacher education institutes were already in the private sector. And at the time of JVC, we had 80% of our elementary school going population in the state schools. So it was that skewed. Today, of course, because of encouragement to privatization, we've probably come to about 65% in the state schools, but our teachers continue to be educated in private. And this particular recommendation actually was made an important part of one of the subcommittees that I worked with, where we proposed a college model for the education of teachers, like the Bachelors of Elementary Education, because that's a very economically viable model. We don't have to set up new institutes. There is a library, there is a canteen, there are spaces, you can add rooms and so on. And we did that very well with some of the colleges which we started. Of course, we were not allowed to expand. And at that time, there were 34,000 undergraduate colleges in the country, and there were about 11 to 12,000 teacher training institutes. So our recommendation was, why don't we do that? So we don't have to worry about closing down the substandard teaching shops. We can start programs right inside undergraduate college spaces. Some of the UP colleges did try that as well, but that was obviously set aside. And today, we have actually almost 48,000 or more undergraduate colleges. So we are even more strengthened today to follow that model, but JVC is dead and buried. And of course, undertaking the restructuring of NCT, where the task force gave a wonderful report. I can't talk about it. I don't have that much of time, but was, again, not really looked at. Now, the question that I'm flagging today in a big way is the importance of listening to teachers. And I would like to present, after this background, which gives us a little bit of, some statistical understanding, some sort of scale level understanding of where we are. It's important to look at the importance of listening to teachers, which provides us with a decolonial perspective. And what that means is what we're going to discuss a little bit. So if you look at any literature on decolonizing education, we find that this seems to be an interesting starting point for reimagining the challenges that teachers are facing in India and, of course, the global South. I've been involved in one such project in some countries of the global South, including Colombia, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Rwanda, and so on. And a lot of insights have come out of that research as well. So the conditions of coloniality, I would say, even today, continue to shape teachers' work, even in our country, and their professional identity. So we're drawing on the theoretical work of Ganshi in 2013, where he proposed, and this is an African scholar, proposed 3 kinds of coloniality. One, coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, and coloniality of being. So power really means that it helps us to see the wider historical, political, economic context against which we can see how systems of teachers and their preparation have emerged in the global South. And this is very similar to what I said about the proliferation of substandard private institutions. And there were 2 critical points if you look at the time series. And we are in the process of finalizing a school and teacher education atlas at a national level. All this data in a month or 2 months' time will be available on the net, and we'll keep you posted because it can be of great value to researchers and people working in education sector, specifically looking at the data of DICE, UDICE, Teacher Education Institutes through NCT, the census, and of course the RTE to look at how schools are complying or not complying. So the political economy has strengthened over the period of time. And if I look at one particular watershed moment was around 2003-04, when Arjun Singh was Minister of Education. And that is when we saw proliferation of the private institutes in teacher education. So the government school teacher education institutes move from the number 400, 500 to at the most 700. I mean, it remains under 1,000 and the rest are all private. The second huge jump of private institutes is after JVC. So can you imagine the paradox when JVC is suggesting that we need to close these down? And we have in 2017-18, when we have another huge jump to the private institute. So we are still at the number 96, 97% at the private. The second, coloniality of knowledge, actually draws attention to the discursive context based on a Eurocentric thinking model, or the Western model, as we call it, in relation to teacher professionalism. How do we look at professionalization of teachers? What is teacher professionalism? And this discourse comes from the Eurocentric frame and continues to be imposed on us as well. And both these, that is the coloniality of power and coloniality of knowledge, actually is embodied in the teacher, is embodied in the teacher's work and her sense of professional identity. And I think this is why this theoretical frame is a very important frame for us to look at when we look at our own teachers in the Indian context. We should also perhaps go a little bit backwards to understand what is this decolonization? What do we mean? Does it only mean Western ways of thinking? No, I think we need to look at it firstly in the fact that it has a long history, because there are anti-colonial struggles right across the southern globe. And in India, of course, we've had two kinds of narratives. One is the anti-colonial narrative that came through the freedom struggle, which was, even the anti-colonial vision of education, Gandhi's Nai Talim, Tagore's Shantiniketan, Aurobindo's integral education, Vivekanand, and so on. But we had another very interesting parallel discourse that was even longer than the anti-colonial view that started with Mahatma Phule, the anti-caste discourse. And I seem to have missed putting it here, but that is the discourse that Ambedkar took forward and, of course, brought in many interesting ideas from Kabir, from Buddha, and so on. And that's how we got our constitution. Now, unfortunately, the anti-colonial thinking of education and of society and the anti-caste epistemes did not meet, because Ambedkar's push for Dalit advancement was something that Gandhi felt is something we can do later. It's our own homegrown problem. We don't need the British for that to solve it. Let them get out first. But I think Ambedkar was right and Gandhi was wrong, because we were never able to then deal with it. And today also we see how it's happening. Now, the question is that these ways of looking at the natural and the social world, which are Eurocentric ways, and the whole development paradigm comes from there. It completely rejects, or I would say downplays, completely insults the localized, the indigenous perspectives that we have. And of course, in India, we can't even say perspective which is localized. There's such a huge diversity here, and the diversity across the southern globe. This should be posing a challenge to universalistic conception, which is very Eurocentric. So decolonization basically tells us, better look at the unspoken assumptions with respect to the question of knowledge. What is knowledge in the scientific sense. I mean, why do we say that, today it's turmeric latte, by the way, available in coffee shops? But why is it that the understanding of the application of turmeric in our society, or black pepper, or any of these herbs that we have such a rich understanding of, was never looked at as science? Because modern science was very, very restricted. It had a very restricted definition. And I think feminists, more than anyone else, will know how we've been pushing against it and trying to say that social science is also a science. And I think education is still fighting to even be called a social science. And that is my big lament in the 40 years of my history in the university. So the contemporary understandings of what it means to be a teacher continue to be prompted by these development of mass education systems under colonialism. Now, I think it's also important for us to understand teacher professionalism, which is often defined, again, on the experiences of teachers from the global north and imposed here. So we are all deficit. We are all deficient. And whatever they tell us is what we have to reach towards, right? I mean, smoking was at one time considered modern. Today, it may be a little different because we are looking at other issues. But two broad approaches define professionalism of teachers. One is right-based approach, which is close to UNESCO and the ILO. And the second is the teacher effectiveness discourse proposed by the World Bank, and of course, the whole donor system. Now, both these discourses have very contrasting views of the quality of education. But nevertheless, both these discourses are still deficient in terms of decolonizing. So the third approach is what is called the approach of social justice. It is a perspective that is associated with issues of autonomy of the teacher, control over her own work, specialized knowledge, certification, her status in society, the salary levels, and of course, how do we develop ourselves professionally all along? Now, these three concepts of knowledge, autonomy, and responsibility are interrelated. And that is why it's important to understand that they need autonomy, because the educational practice world itself is very complex and unpredictable. In fact, I often tell my students that there is one core principle that if we succeed in teaching you as teachers, is the principle of learning how to handle uncertainty. If I can learn how to handle uncertainty, I'll be a good teacher, because my classroom is going to be uncertain. It is in my head that it is the same old chapter I'm teaching for the 10th year, but there are new children. There are 35, 40, sometimes 60 minds sticking together, and they want to ask questions. It's another matter that we consider asking questions as a cultural problem, bado ke muh nahi lagte, etc., etc. But I think what is important is to see how the impact of discourses of the North has really given us so much trouble, where teaching, of course, traditionally has been looked at as a semi-profession, and we continue to do that. It's no different all over the globe. This is happening, and it's becoming worse, as if teachers, don't need any complex education, any epistemic engagement. And we, of course, find that these have severe consequences for teacher pay conditions, their services, and their own professionalism and identity. SDG 4 is an opportunity, I would say, to redefine professionalism, but I put a question mark there because we need to debate on this. But I think the repurposing of education is possible, although my major critique of the Sustainable Development Goals is that it is still a normative frame. So it's all about ought to, should, and so on. But the point is, it is an opportunity because it says clearly that teachers should be empowered, motivated, supported with well-resourced, efficient, all the goodies are there, but we don't know how much of it gets to the teacher. But a professional teacher today has actually become a worker. She's a laborer today, she or he. And the increasing rigidity and top-down directives, teacher-proof materials are a are a sort of evidence to that. Their performance is judged according to those standards. And during the pandemic, we did a study which told us the teachers were actually told by Delhi Directorate Government, and this is the capital of the country, that please do not interact with your students other than what we give you in the form of worksheets, in the form of YouTube links. So they were not even supposed to talk to their students. So the critique, therefore, seems to be that this approach, which is a human capital approach and an instrumental approach to teachers and teaching, it fails to recognize that teaching is a relational activity, its interpersonal nature. And concurrently, the increasing influence of PISA, TIMSS, PEARLS, all these international assessments are actually taking that whole idea of teachers' knowledge to become decontextualized and very managerial. So Whitty puts it very well in 2008 that the most powerful determinant of teacher professionalism today is the state and not the profession. You see, so teachers are not defining their profession. Doctors are, lawyers are, but why aren't teachers? Because they don't have that autonomy. So the decolonial vision is that of the social justice approach, which critiques the World Bank approach, and it counterposes the view of the teacher as a technocrat, but as a reflexive practitioner. This is more closely aligned with the right-based approach. And of course, this is something where we insist that young people's capacities have to be developed in such a manner that we are also simultaneously dismantling conditions of oppression and exploitation, which means telling children ask questions, and the teacher's not the only one asking questions. So the social science perspective, I think, is a key frame which comes from the capability approach of Martha Nussbaum and, of course, Amartya Sen. I've written on this. It's very, very interesting to look at that literature. Social science, social justice literature recognizes that educational institutes are part of the oppression. It's actually, creating that problem which we are trying to transform. So I am actually advocating for transformation in education. I'm advocating that the teacher is the most critical link in this transformation, because the teacher is right in the middle of the curriculum and the child. And we have to develop the teacher because the wider social base gets impacted. And they should be taken out of the state implementing agency role that was rooted during the colonial times. Now, how we decolonize, we need to go back to coloniality of power, knowledge, and being. And of course, to look at education as an important institution for incorporating diversity. And I'm not sure whether we are really developing our teachers to teach for diversity. When we have homogenized curriculum and put it into neat learning outcomes, then we are telling teachers also that all children are the same, that maybe they differ in terms of stages of development, some really vulgarized form of theoretical study that we propose to do in teacher training. But, the West has de-theorized teacher education. And I say that India did not even theorize, and we are already de-theorizing. So there's a huge problem here. And I think there is a collusion which comes from the colonial time between the colonial idea of education and the Brahmanical hold over education and knowledge. So listening to teachers is critical. I'm aware that we are very late already, but I have to give you some testimonies. The italicized are the quotes of teachers. Sometimes during a regular day at school as a teacher, I lose stream of the teaching learning process to the administrative duties that I'm expected to attend, like the distribution of whatever, uniforms, opening bank accounts, issuing Aadhaar cards. So the teacher is saying, I'm not talking of privatization, I'll skip that. The teacher is saying that I'm always pulled away from my primary duty as a teacher and directed towards other duties. And it seems that other duties are more important because there's pressure from higher authorities. It's a kind of a chain. Have I become a part of this chain? Sometimes I ask myself, is this even a school? And I a teacher anymore? Or is it just a place where multiple things happen and I'm a government employee and I'm assigned this work and I will just have to do it? And what teachers are also saying is that children are saying कि हम कब पढ़ेंगे? इस तरह के सवाल बच्चों ने पूछा. And this was largely during the corona period, after the corona, when they came back, but teachers were busy doing, filling in data. One of them says, it has been almost 10 days and I'm yet to expend extended time with the children. Children are asking, when are we going to study? I had no replies. All I had were registers, lists, children's bank accounts, several other registers, lists. I'm a multitasker, task performer. Almost I feel as if I'm a Ashtabhuja, with 8 arms that we, worship. So testimonies of teachers tell us that pedagogic communication has also just taken over, by administration. And even when teachers feel that worksheets are not pedagogically correct, for example, one of them said, we were told blanketly that please do dictation 5 times a week. And we said, look, this is not correct because we've learned that dictation is not the way to teach. And they said, you better do what we are telling you. Otherwise, memos are given to teachers. So even when they feel that things are pedagogically inappropriate because they have their own understanding, they are dismissed. The surveillance of teachers, and I call it a new form of coloniality. And of course, Mr. Kejriwal is very happy that every parent can see their children inside the school classrooms. But the teachers are saying that we will not be able to be spontaneous in class, nor even relate to our students. We are also worried that the relationship will be affected between teachers and students. So instead of focusing on real education, on critical thinking, we are only enhancing prioritizing market-based skills. And the base of students who are aspiring for teacher education programs is also likely to shift. Teachers want, in all contexts, that they should continue to develop professionally. They miss the discussions during pre-service training. They miss the discussions. And this is some of the Delhi University teachers who said, we had a resource center there. We had a teacher fellowship program and teachers used to come for study sessions. So they mentioned that. And they look for opportunities to read, to understand. They join short-term courses, whatever is available on the net. So I think, Adhyan has a lot of interesting work to do because teachers are there to seek. So we also need to confront what I would call an internalized coloniality, coming from the idea of coloniality of being. And I think I will have to skip this for lack of time. But this is a little heuristic model that we were able to develop when we did the study on decolonizing teacher professionalism, where community school environment, quality education, teacher professionalism, and policy environment are how they are interrelated and how important it is for us to look at all of this simultaneously and not reductionistically, which the instrumentalized model forces us to look at. And the key areas of teacher governance include their paying conditions, but also the role of teacher unions. And I saw many teacher unions during the COVID period organize discussions around NEP 2020. I attended many of these sessions, and I used to push them to say, talk academics also. Don't just talk about your pay scales, although that's an important point, especially when they are all contractual. Largely, I would say we are at a stage, we are at a stage where the wedge between the constitutional aims of education and the market-based reforms are becoming very sharp in the practice of education. And there is much more prioritization of economic self-interest rather than public and social concerns. And very importantly, I think we also need to reject the deficit view of teacher professionalism. All of us working with teachers will have to retune ourselves and say, look, teachers know their children. Let's give them a chance. Let's hear them and find out what they want and what they can see. I remember, going for a joint review commission. When was it? I mean, something like 1998 or 1999, I'm talking of so many years ago, the Joint Review Commission of the DPEP, I went to Chhattisgarh, a new state, and when I posed a question to teachers, what would you like? What is it that you would like support for? And they were like dumbfounded. They said, nobody has asked us what we want, so we don't even know what to say. I mean, I'm talking of that time and this time. I don't think we've gone very far ahead. But the most important thing, therefore, is to reject the deficit view and to develop processes of knowledge co-creation, where the teacher also becomes at the center of this knowledge co-creation. So I'm not saying the teacher knows everything, but I'm saying the teacher's perspective and the respect for the teacher as a practitioner, I think becomes very important in the way we engage and the way we enable the teacher to grow and feel empowered as we go along. And I think this will be a great service that we will do if we can through our own efforts. I've spent 30 odd years in the service of teachers, I would say. And every time I speak for teachers, people tell me, but teachers have to be accountable, and they do this wrong and they do that wrong. Teacher bashing became almost fashionable in our country. And I think today there are many new actors coming in and speaking for teachers, even in civil society and the corporate sector, which is a great thing. But the question for us, there are two important questions. Are we ready to reinvent the idea of teacher agency? Because if we want to give centrality to teachers, we will have to give them agency. Second, can we develop a publicness, a public-minded teacher through the private system? These are questions I'd like us to think about. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry I've overrun, but there's always so much more to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights and also talking about the importance of the teacher professions. And I feel that listening to you, all the teachers who are here will feel motivated, and they will be um, able to express more and see their self-worth. Uh, so far, I've not seen much questions coming in, but I think if you all have any questions, please do ask. Yes, and
yeah, I have a question whenever it's possible for me to ask. There's
yeah,
one on the
Kavita, go ahead.
chat, but there's one on the chat, so let's get that first. Nidhi's question.
Nidhi, would you like to unmute yourself and share the question?
Yeah, hi. Hello, Poonam ma'am. It was a pleasure listening to you. I've been also thinking about social justice and equity in education, and hence my question is related to that, which is I wonder in schools, why is there an urgency to not like school by the teachers, but from the system? Why is there so much focus on the curriculum instead of focusing on the skills that may prepare children for the challenges that we might face today or we're facing today, for example, injustice and in terms of climate or social injustice, etc.
Yes.
Thank you.
You want me to take a few other questions and then respond? Steffi?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay.
You could share. Till then, if anyone else have any questions, you can start putting them in the chat box.
Okay. Can I ask my question, which is really
Yes,
about the fact that in the states that we're working in, we find that everywhere the SCRT is the one that's supposed to be looking at teacher education up to the 8th is what they claim, because somewhere they are almost afraid to say that they can manage the 9th to the 12th. And I feel that there's such a sort of paucity of confidence there itself. That they have to ask others. I know that, say, the Azim Premji University has been doing amazing work at being able to do contextualized textbooks because they can't do it themselves, right? So the university goes to the states to actually support them to do that. but at no point do I see states having the confidence. And I'm just wondering, is that something that is not noticed, or why does that not come into policy? Whereas that whole operating mechanism that you spoke about with whether the commission said something, then what happened to the actual capacity building there?
I'll quickly respond to these two questions. The first about why focus only on curriculum and not on skills. If I've understood you correctly, you're saying about pedagogic communication skills, pedagogic skills, right? Perhaps. I think that actually the focus on curriculum has also disappeared. Now the focus is only on learning outcomes. So education process and the classroom itself has gone out of the radar of the policymaker. It's only about learning outcomes. So even RTE, which actually talks of curriculum and, creating a safe space for learning and contextualize, and it also talks of, following NCF 2005, all of that, they look at it as inputs. That's the way the policy is thinking. Those are all inputs. So we only need to focus on. I would say that when you want to focus on pedagogic communication skills and so on, you will have to work with the teacher. Now, investment with the teacher through pre-service or through in-service, both have been outsourced, private teacher training institutes, and in-service also is outsourced today. It's amazing. Boston Consulting Agency is doing some in-service works in Haryana, for example. So it's worrying, actually. That's the way I would answer it. The second question that Kavita asks, I think India is a story where for a long time, there have been some remarkable experiments in education. I mean, Gandhi's Nai Talim, Shanti Niketan, Shri Aurobindo schools, Krishnamurti Foundation schools, and a host of other alternative, Anand, this, that, so many schools. But India is a remarkable story when none of these things converge. It's all happening in islands. And of course, politically also, there are issues like Vardha scheme, died for whatever reasons. There are many reasons. But the point is, you're absolutely right. We haven't been able to convert. So if APU or APF is doing that work, now why is it that we are not networking with others? And why is it that we are not enabling the institutionalization of these ideas? So they remain again as some organization, university, or whoever doing it. And once they move, everything else moves out with them. This is a critical institutional question. I think we need to apply our minds to this. I don't have a ready answer, but this has always been the case. So either it's a cult of a figure, or it's some kind of a, some force that's holding, and that force goes away and everything falls apart. But we do need to think of institutional measures, I think. There are a few other questions that have come.
Yes, and I think Vidya and Diti also had their hands raised. Vidya, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, yes. So thank you so much, ma'am. There were a lot of different perspectives that we gained. One thing that I was thinking is many a times teacher trainings or education and curriculum goes hand in hand. And generally, when we see that there is a curriculum change, then there is a separate training for teachers to get them adapted to it. On other side, we also have, it sounds also kind of contradictory, because we are also talking about competency based and learning outcomes. So the general understanding, one level of understanding is that irrespective of the curriculum that we use, if we align everything to learning outcomes, it is pretty much going to be the same. But we see a lot of gaps in that. So what should be a system's outlook to make sure that there is see that teachers are shocked when the curriculum changes. So I have to adapt to a new curriculum is also something that we hear. So what should be the system's outlook so that there is more teacher agency and they're equipped to adapt to any changing curriculum?
I think there's a problem in this perspective that curriculum should be changed and teachers should adapt to it. There's a problem in that perspective. And this is the problem even with NCF 2005. I wrote an article in EPW in 2005 about NCF. exactly on this issue. NC of 2005 also treats the teacher like somebody who should follow a curriculum given. Now, curriculum in our country from the time of anti-colonial struggle has been a deliberative exercise. It is not based on the essentialized principles that Bloom's taxonomy gave, or Bobbitt gave, or the behaviorist model gave, which is what was very, that there was a course in B.Ed called the Essential Principles of Curriculum Design. Now, I think this is a problem. A curriculum cannot be designed out of context. It has to be a deliberative exercise. And therefore, it is important to involve the teacher in designing curriculum. We may say teachers have no capacity, they have less capacity. Let's support them, like APU is doing perhaps, like Eclavier did, etc., etc. But the point is that you must involve the teacher in designing that. Otherwise, you can't get out of the competency-based learning outcome approach. So there is a huge difference between curriculum, syllabus, and learning outcomes. And I think we need to straighten our concepts around that a bit to understand the agency of the teacher.
Thank you. Diti, do you want to share your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for conducting this session. It was very insightful, and I've been reading a lot about your work as well in the past, and I'm really excited to just be here and listen to you live. My question revolves a lot around professionalism of the teachers. There are so many of the teachers who are already there, the seasoned teachers who came in with the idea of providing that social justice, of bringing that change in the system. But once they got consumed by the system and the administrative burden, their mindset has completely changed. And this is something I saw firsthand when I used to teach as well. And these are government teachers, contractual teachers, right? And over a period of time, these are the teachers who, when I started out, I did engineering and then started teaching. These teachers who were so passionate about teaching said that please don't continue with this field. Once you're done teaching here, just stop, because it's not something that is going to be sustainable. It's not something that gives you what you're looking for. We enter the system with the same mindset, and now we're not interested. We're just doing it because this is how we kill time, or this is how we make our ends meet. How do you sort of bridge this mindset gap in the teachers who are already there? These are the seasoned teachers who will influence the new teachers who come in after the pre-service trainings, right? So how do you sort of, because that the first time I interacted with the teacher, I was quite taken aback, and I wanted to I thought twice about the whole field and the whole experience of teaching as a profession. And obviously, over a period of time, a lot of things helped me sort of not go into that rabbit hole. But at the same time, how do you bring the motivation? How do you support these seasoned teachers at the same time? Make sure that the pre-service teachers also feel like, how do you, just the gap between, the bridge between the two? Like, how can we maintain that?
Yeah, see, one of the big mistakes that India has made is to neglect its pre-service program, okay? Because we think that we could have done, pedagogical renewal through the DPP, through a lot of teacher motivation workshops, child-centered, joyful learning, discovery learning, all that song and dance. But mindset, if you're talking of mindset, it actually means that we have to enable the teacher. How does she empower herself? By also informing herself, by also thinking critically. So it's a huge, huge challenge. And to be able to think critically means that we need to revisit school curriculum knowledge. And only then can I think critically. Rather than if I now teach from a textbook which has no Mughal history, I'm going to teach the history that's been given by me, which is politically motivated, not given by a historian, a scholar. Now, how do I enable a teacher to even ask that question? Why no Mughal history? And by the way, how do we even teach Shivaji without Aurangzeb? So the point is that this is a space which requires a lot of back and forth movement. That's the reason why the BLEd 4-year program was designed with a lot of redundancy in it, where teachers are given a chance to revisit their school knowledges, to now look at it critically and not just say, okay, if you have to do multiplication, you have to just put a cross here. Why do you put a cross there? Why do you carry 1? Actually, you carry 10. Why do you borrow 1? No, you borrow 10. Why? What is place value? What is the idea of this algorithmic knowledge? There is a concept behind it. Now, teachers have to be engaged with concepts so that there is a rigorous, robust knowledge that they will teach. A. B, they have to also engage with society, social concerns. Only then will they be able to take history in its spirit, or to take geography, or to take sociology, or whatever. The point is that an engagement, deep engagement with knowledge, alongside teachers' personal development. Why do we only say Krishnamurti has a vision of education, Tagore and Gandhi and John Dewey have? Let the teacher also develop her vision of education. What should be the aims of education? These are questions that teachers must engage with, and not just say pragmatism, Dewey's this, Tagore's this. We have to look at the development of the teacher, both professionally and personally, which requires not only the subject engagement that they will teach, but also the foundational knowledge. So social science is not a school subject alone. Social science is an overarching frame within which we need to develop the teacher. Empowerment or the agency of the teacher can only develop if the teacher is sure of how she's able to analyze knowledge also, or even pick the little cues that she sees in the children that she's teaching. If a child is coming late to school every day in a government school, if she's had a good experience of relating to children from busties, she would connect that the child is coming late because this child is going to fill water in a long queue early morning before coming to school. So the context, the social, cultural, economic, political context is foundational knowledge for the teacher. But all that we teach teachers through our teacher training, 1-year BEd, now 2-year is very different, is stages of development, this theory, that theory, does it even apply to my children? Where are my children coming from? Which backgrounds they come from? So I think contextualize, that's what I was calling the heuristic model, a contextualization of the teacher's own development and her own funds of knowledge need to be brought on the table and engaged with and discussed. It's not only children, by the way, who have alternative conceptions of knowledge. So a young child will think there are 3 kinds of earth. One that I stand on, which is flat. One that I see on the screen, which is round, and maybe another kind. Now, these are called alternative frameworks, Rosalind Driver's work and so on. But the adults have a misconception also. They have misconceptions, not alternative frames. So if a heavy and a light thing, a feather and a coin are thrown together, all of us tend to say, why is it that the coin falls faster? Because it has mass. No, that's not true. The scientific answer is that there is air friction. The feather therefore does not fall that fast because there is air friction. So there is epistemological frames of knowledges. Science is different from social science, history is different from geography, and each of them have not only an epistemological framing, it has a different method of inquiry. I think we need to teach our children history by showing them the sources of knowledge of history. How do historians construct history would be one lesson. It is there actually in the NCF textbooks. I don't know whether it's still there, but that was the idea. So it's a different conception of knowledge, not just decolonizing it, but also bringing it the robustness that it requires. So when a child of primary school asks, why is the sky blue? I don't think I can answer this question without doing some MSc level physics. I need that knowledge. And specifically for young children, we tend to think, no. Class 5 maths is enough to teach class 5 maths. But it isn't. So one is that robustness of knowledge, which we are very weak in, our higher education system also is. And the second is the foundational knowledge. And I would say both are equally important, and we have to work on these.
Yes, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Madam, one question. Nowadays, people are talking about professional standards for teachers. What is your opinion on this? Professional
Standards, yeah.
for
They've
teachers?
been talking about this for a while now, since DPP. And we've had adepts, no? It used to be called?
Yeah, yes.
I think Subir had worked
Subir,
on it,
Subir
Subir Shukla. I personally think, again, the same problem is, you see, when we homogenize standards, then we leave little room for diversity. Now, standards may be important, but shall we ask the school for teachers to collectively sit together and work out standards? What are standards of teaching? How will you assess me? Will you assess me by how I plan my lesson, in which I'm anticipating what children will say? Right? Now, literally, I mean, B.Ed students used to write prior knowledge. Prior knowledge means children have studied chapter 1 before I teach them chapter 2. Now, that's not prior knowledge. For every new lesson, when I go into class, I will have to assess the readiness of my students, class 5 or class 11. The readiness of my students in terms of the concepts that I'm going to introduce. Because there will always be a base knowledge. And that's what I need to assess. And then I develop the whole lesson and the class and the process. So I think standards is a good idea. But there can be standards for a good enough large classroom with proper furniture, with enough and variety of books in the library, with a playground, and this is all there in RTE. The standards of pedagogy and curriculum, we have to leave to the contextualized context. It could be state level, but it has to be district level also, and then at the school level. So I think we will have to work simultaneously. There can be an overarching state level, because Jharkhand is very different from Kashmir and Kerala. And then districts will be very different. And our classrooms will be very different. I might have more OBC children in my class. I might have more children who speak a tribal language. So how will I do standards? So I think the same question, the same issue applies to standards as it applies to curriculum, which is to make it a deliberative exercise and to evolve it out of context along with the teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Yeah, ma'am, we have quite a few more questions. I think Sai has asked question, Bijon, Simran, then Arun and Aniket, also Sarah, and I can see Jyoti has also raised the hand. So we have crossed about 15 minutes more. Is it okay for everyone to stay back for another just 10 more minutes? Then we could take these questions. Otherwise, maybe we could share them over email.
I don't see anybody leaving. Do you want to just scan the questions, Poonam, and just have a look through and see what you want to say, and then we can sort of wrap up so that we don't keep you.
Yeah, okay. How do we free teachers from administrative works? We have to do policy advocacy for that. We have to work with policymakers. I hope they are not only Boston Consulting Agency and Central Square Foundation. Is change in how teachers function possible without any change in the larger assessment system? A very good question. So long as assessment is driven by high-stakes assessment, which is PISA kind, which we're also doing national achievement tests and all NCRT does, I think it becomes very difficult to work towards curriculum and the teacher. So that's why Eclavier's experiment was interesting, because they also started, along with their textbooks, teacher training and open book examination. So these are things that we have to work simultaneously, which means that if as an organization you're working with teachers, you will also have to press policymakers to say, please give us freedom to work with assessment also. So you will have to converge these efforts. I'm going to do it very briefly, because everybody, in the interest of time, I have no problem. I can sit here till 7. I've taught for 4 hours at one time, so no problem. But in some ways, the school has acted as a center, for social center for dispersal of service. Exactly, that's what the teachers are saying. Given that this led to social justice getting enabled through access to resources and other things, this has made the teacher shift away from focusing on social justice. How do you see the balance or the lack? I would say that so far, I'm not sure that we are working within a social justice framework. I think the social has never been important either in the curriculum of the school or in the teachers' training and education preparation, because we've only looked at the level that the child is. How do we pitch the curriculum at the primary level, at class 5, at class 8? These are the kind of things we have taught in pedagogy. Unfortunately, the 2-year B.Ed is different, and I'm hoping that that'll bring some difference as we go ahead. B.Ed is very different. Every student in the BLED, student intern, develops her own teaching plan. It doesn't have to follow a common format, but they have discussions in groups. So one teacher is assigned 6 students in a school, so they have good discussions so that they learn from each other as well. And of course, the social has to be brought in very deliberatively, because social is never seen as important. Even emotion is not seen as important. For example, some schools have been doing this very well. In Sardar Patel, there is this idea of the homeroom teacher. Okay, so it's not a class teacher. It's a homeroom teacher. And they also have a homeroom period or something like that, where you actually talk about, anything, something personal. Children are allowed to sort of air themselves. And I think those spaces become also very important, because if we, I'll give you a very short comment of a child who moved from upper KG into class 1. And I just asked this question. It was 1 month into class 1. I said, how do you find class 1? You've been through upper KG, KG, and now what is the difference? And after a lot of thought and pause, the child tells me, पहले हम चीज खत्म करते थे, अब ये छोड़ो, ये करो, ये छोड़ो, ये करो. What is that? The timetable. One of the most ridiculous inventions, I would say. We need to think radically about education. We need to think radically about teachers. We will not be able to change the system if we tinker with the system. It requires literally a good physical shakeup. And the teacher is really a good space to start. Because the teacher can talk about the curriculum, you can engage, the teacher can talk about classroom organization, the teacher is in a position. But as somebody said, yes, she sort of loses heart because there is another kind of socialization happening in a school where senior teachers are telling us, forget it, it's not a great job to do. Abhi to, even our BLED interns are told, abhi to aap naye hai na, matlab, don't worry, in a few years' time, you'll become like us. Now, there's a lot of research done on this. It's called teacher socialization. So if a system is so full of inertia, then any new inputs that come will also get into that inert space rather than change that inert space. So a lot of people say, oh, it's a lost cause. I don't think so. I think the BLED has proved that through a 4-year program, which is radically different, actually you can make completely teachers who are able to reflect, who are able to then take their journey forward even in their spaces which are personal and not just professional. But how can you do that in an in-service program is a big question, because you have much less time. But I guess maybe we should think of models of in-service where there's some continuity, and we keep sort of coming back to them rather than just do one time and disappear. And perhaps encourage what has been said in literature ever so often, communities of practice. Teacher collectives never happen. And this is, I would call it a political conspiracy, because we don't want teachers to collect. When they collect, they become powerful and they demand, right? Now, if we as civil society organizations work with teachers, could we encourage and put in place some mechanisms where they learn to do things together just at the school level? Not necessarily at a cluster of schools, which DPP tried to do, and it didn't happen. So collectives are important. There are quite a lot of questions. ITEP, oh my God, that's a sore, that's a raw nerve touched. ITEP is very problematic. I can do a couple of sessions on that, but the only thing I'll say here is that the structure of the ITEP, the curriculum frame, I have seen that. It's actually 4 years of the 1-year B.Ed. It's totally in the colonial frame. They're going back to philosophy of education, sociology of education. There's that, apart from, of course, the cultural nationalist ideology coming in, Indian knowledge, whatever that means. So ITEP is a huge problem, and we need to resist it. I don't know how. Okay, foundational literacy and numeracy, absolutely true. And this has become, actually, people consider this as a great contribution of NEP 2020. I don't think it's a bad idea that they focused on it. But the problem is that, literacy, again, the difference between learning and education. So literacy is not just about alphabetic control. There is so much to even developing literacy through a empowered experience, right? So I think that's where we need to focus on. And the NEP's focus on literacy, foundational literacy and numeracy through Anganwadis is one of the most ridiculous ideas. First, we don't pay our Anganwadis. Second, they are not trained in education. Third, there is no physical space for them. So, these are great ideas sitting on clouds. I mean, we need to look at, that's why I say my first critique of NEP is that it completely dismisses ground realities. It doesn't see what there is. Recommendations to study nuances. Yes, there are plenty I can give you. I can give you a list of reference. It'd be a good idea to start the course for now, because there's a lot of reference there also. What do you think of third-party agencies involved in teacher training, startups, NGOs? Well, the last thing I'll want is for teacher training to also become a commodified service. Education is labor of love. I mean, you may call me romantic, but I prefer to be that way. Education returns cannot happen the way economists want us to think about education. I think NGOs have done their bit. Some have done very well. Some have done very badly. But more important would be not whether NGOs or startups, but more important is what I was saying, converging efforts. Wherever there is some interesting and good work happening, could we network? Could we learn from each other? Could we then, make that impact which can be wider and deeper, I think. Yeah, okay. I'm glad
That
you like
was
DLED.
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Building
was
leaders in education, of course. I mean, we all need to build leaders, I think. But can we also regard our teachers as leaders? Can we regard our teachers as public intellectuals? Can we begin to believe that our teachers can think? Can we begin to believe that our teachers have agile minds? And if we give them that autonomy, that space to learn, I can tell you from experience how excited they get to learn.
Thank you, ma'am. I think it's a good note on to kind of close the session. Thank you so much for patiently going through all the questions and answering. I think almost everyone's questions have been answered. And I would really like to extend my heartfelt thank you, ma'am, for being here and for having such a thoughtful and insightful evening. Ma'am, we are very thankful for your time and for sharing your deep insights into the education with all of us. Also, a big thank you to everyone over here. I know we are like almost half an hour over the time that we planned, but you all have all stayed back, and I'm sure that you all have all enjoyed the session as much as we have. Thank you so much for being over here, and we will be having more sessions upcoming. So please stay tuned. Nishta, if you could share the slide on everyone and for everyone to kind of follow us. We have started a new page, a bias page, where we put all this information of the backbenchers and different things that are happening. So please do take a screenshot and please do scan this QR codes and follow us and stay tuned on the upcoming events. Also, we would like to talk a little bit about a bias platform. You all can all
Okay,
log in.
so you can continue. I want to say thank you for giving me this
Okay, yes.
opportunity. And also thank you, Kavita.
Thank you
We'll
so much. Thank you
see you
so much.
again. Bye-bye. I'll leave this to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Yeah, I would like to share a little bit about Abhyas platform. It's a platform where all the practitioners' knowledge from different school leaders who are actually working in the field of education has been compiled and put together. If any one of you would like to look at it, please visit the abhyas.org. And thank you everyone for being here.